The first theory, the naturalistic subjective theory. The appearances are something that happened to the disciples, but it is related to their internal faculties. They did not see anything in reality, or as someone said, they cannot capture it in a video camera or by video camera. Nothing happened in real time and space. So under that big title or big theory, there are smaller ideas. One is the hallucination theory or subjective visions. And I want to highlight the difference between hallucination, visual hallucination, and visual illusion. Hallucination is that you see something when there is no reason or inciting stimuli to make you see that. The illusion is the opposite, where you see something but you misinterpret it or you see it in a different way. So for example, visual illusion, you see a tree branch but you see it as a snake, when in fact the tree branch gave you this vision of the stimuli of the snake. Visual hallucination, there is no tree, there are no branches, but you still see a snake which is coming out of no stimulus at all. Dominic Crossan believed that the disciples had this attitude. They couldn't accept that Jesus is dead, and out of their grief they started to see visions of him. Gerd Ludman also stated that shared hallucinatory fantasies started during the appearance to 500 with one or two others. And that the brothers of Jesus went to Jerusalem and were caught in this mass ecstasy. I want to talk a little bit about Peter and later on about Paul. They have many theories related to them specifically. Goulder said that Peter had a hallucination of Jesus, and these hallucinations are coming from his low self-image and his grief and guilt for denying him. So he started to have these visions, and then he went to share these visions with the disciples, who on their own started to have their own hallucination about the risen Jesus. And he called this a communal delusions, or infectious hallucinations, and or mass hysteria. Many terms trying to explain something that is hard to have a fact about it. And that's a typical pattern that we're gonna see. And he said that these are similar to Bigfoot or UFO sightings. Now the response to this would be that personally, in my professional career as a physician for 25 years now, hallucinations are just a lifelong condition or conditions, and the patient has it for years, and they know about it, and some of them even can differentiate that it's a hallucination, and none of them is in response to just emotional circumstances alone, but it is a disease. Not to mention that statistically speaking, you have a hallucination in 500 people, or 13 or 12 or 11 at the same time. I'm going to touch base on it, but it is not scientific in any way. Dr. Licona on this group hallucination, he mentioned something very interesting also, and he said that group hallucinations is not documented in the books of psychology or psychiatry, and it's rare to impossible that a group of people will have hallucinations at the same time. He also mentioned that Bigfoot and UFO sightings will fall maybe under illusion more than hallucinations, because sometimes people will say we saw something, but maybe it's not Bigfoot, but they thought it is. So there is an illusion, not hallucination. So we cannot compare the two really. He mentioned that these are just speculations with no evidence. And here is my point again. I want to emphasize it, that hallucinations cannot occur at the same time to 500 followers and about the same person and having the same content. So they may have a diverse hallucinations happening different times about different things, but to all of them have it at the same time about the same person and to say the same stuff, that's not following psychiatry or psychology. Another point is that if you're going to have or you're going to make hallucination about Jesus, you might as well just make it in a glorious manner, that he appeared on the Mount of Transfiguration, white, shining. Moses came from the mountain after taking the Ten Commandments. His face was shining. All of these things, it's engraved in the Jewish tradition that if you want to have something like this, it better be a glorious manner. Even some angels appearing, they will appear with a very white robes and things like that, which is not the case. Jesus' appearances after the resurrection were not glorious in nature. Now, Paul is also having a different story. Gulder, Crossan, Ludman, they shared similar opinions about Paul. That here is the story. He was dissatisfied with the Jewish faith. He was attracted to the Christian God. And he also, Ludman said, he had a childhood friend who was a Gentile friend. And then when he grew up with this dissatisfaction, attraction, he had a struggle how to resolve this mental tension. He had a hallucination that he saw Jesus, who sent him to the Gentile, hence the story of my youth friend who was Gentile. And they say that it was a vision experience without bodily appearance. Dr. Lacuna responded by saying that Paul was not grieving the death of Jesus, and he doesn't have any reason psychologically to have a hallucination about him. And even a visual hallucination will not lead Paul to deduct or conclude that he was raised bodily. About the dissatisfaction, we don't have in his letters anything to support his dissatisfaction with the Jewish God. So here is a point. Modern psychologists often find it difficult to diagnose patients correctly while they are sitting in front of them, even after they question them extensively. And this statement, in my opinion, is true, because you rarely find someone who is psychologically having issues that he has a one problem. It's usually several problems mixed together. So you may have an element of depression with obsession and some anxiety, and he may have 50% of the picture on the depression, 20% here. So it's not just a one thing coming at you, it's just a multiple problems. And maybe some of them also will need counseling, and childhood problems also messing the picture. So it's very hard, and it takes a lot of gifts and listening to people who are sitting in front of you for hours. Non-professionals like Gulder, Ludman, Crossan, Craffords are far more likely to misdiagnose those whom they have never met and who lived 2,000 years ago and in a foreign culture, which makes sense. Number two, under the first theory, is visions in the subliminal consciousness. Christ appeared in and through the disciple imaginative faculties. It was a religious vision, and it's an imagination rather than a bodily appearance. And it is a product of their human psychology or psyche. And we're going to see similar reason or similar causes like these under different titles. So it's not like a new discovery. It's just they change the wording to look like it's a new discovery when it's the same stuff. In fact, I had difficulty. Should I put them all under one topic and finish? Or should I divide them? But I prefer to divide them, so if we come across a different term, we know that it was addressed in this presentation. The response is that in this idea, they have to be disciples first to apply this religious vision about Christ to them. We cannot apply it to Paul, who was not a follower and didn't need a religious vision to justify Jesus. If Paul had any religious vision I would recommend a different style. He would have an imagination that he succeeded in capturing all of these Christian rebels and punishing them all. That would be the natural, normal, expected vision, religious vision of Saul, who was a Jewish zealot, and he wanted to serve his faith properly. The brothers of Christ were not followers of his teaching, and he was a disgrace to the family. If anything, they want to distance themselves, like Peter did at the day when they captured Jesus. He denied him 3 times. That's very natural, acceptable response of a human being. I don't want to be in any way related to that person. So his 2 brothers would say, we want to distance ourselves and not do the opposite. Also, I remember that Peter had a dream or a vision in Acts 11 where God told him, all of these animals, go ahead, slaughter and eat. And Peter said, I don't eat anything unholy. And it was like an indication that God is permitting the Gentiles to enter. And then he had his meeting with Cornelius at that time. Now, in all of that, Peter did not mistake this with a real appearance, but he knew it was a vision. So the disciples are able to differentiate between it is vision and not. Mystic experience, Giza Vermes said that believed that Jesus' followers had a powerful mystic experience, and this transformed them. They felt Jesus' presence, and then all of a sudden they were convinced that he was raised. And because of that, they went away. They went all over to say that he was raised. Some believers felt that this is a telepathic communication. I'm not going to even comment on that. Response to this, the mystical experience may happen to some, but not to all of them at the same time. And what is the cause of this all of a sudden mystic experience? No one knows, and he cannot explain it. Paul and James would not have this mystical experience since they were not followers of Jesus. Again, another one, a new experience of grace and forgiveness had nothing to do with the empty tomb or reports of seeing Jesus. Just they had a profound religious experience of that grace, and there was a misleading language of a bodily resurrection. And he said that this happens to people who are already believers. He had to manipulate the story of Paul to fit his theory, since he was not a follower. The story of James cannot explain that theory of grace, and he cannot explain why they came to faith in the first place that Jesus is resurrected. So in summary, the naturalistic subjective theory, it has many versions, as we saw, and hypotheses to explain what happened to the disciples. The real challenge, as I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to explain the many appearances of Jesus, the different locations, the different people he appeared to, and the different dialogues he had with them, as all of this are just a mere hallucination. Maybe one appearance could be accepted as hallucination, but all of them be explained as this way is hard to accept. If the bodily appearances hypothesis turn out to be the best explanation of what happened, it should not be excluded as the most reasonable and logic cause of the faith and charisma of the disciples.